The stadium lights hit every surface like religion. 40,000 people packed into Vought Arena, shoulder to shoulder, phones up, waiting for the moment they could say they were there when it happened. Giant screens showed the same loop Homelander's face, American flag rippling behind him, the tagline "Safety through Strength" burning white across the bottom. Merchandise tables lined the concourse. T-shirts, foam fingers, miniature capes for kids who wanted to fly home pretending they mattered. Firecracker stood center stage, microphone in hand. Red, white, blue outfit catching every spotlight. Her voice carried across the crowd with practiced enthusiasm, each word designed to land like a promise.
We are living in the safest time in American history. You know why? Because they protect us. Because Vought protects us. Because tonight you're going to see proof that nothing, and I mean nothing, can touch us when we stand together.
The crowd roared. Firecracker grinned, feeding off it, letting the noise build before she raised one hand for silence.
So when Homelander himself comes out here in just a few minutes, I want you to remember something. We're not just watching heroes tonight, we're becoming part of the solution. We're saying yes to security, yes to strength, yes to America.
Applause rolled through the stands like thunder. Camera drones circled overhead, capturing every angle for the live broadcast. Backstage production assistants spoke into headsets, adjusting lighting cues and running final checks on pyrotechnics. Everything moved like a machine built for spectacle. Below the stadium, 6 levels down, where sharp concrete replaced carpet and fluorescent tubes replaced spotlights, the Vought Special Services facility hummed with different energy. Lab coats instead of capes. Clipboards instead of cameras. A project sat in the center of the sterile chamber, sealed behind reinforced glass and biometric locks. The specimen had no official name in any public record. Internally, techs called it the H fragment. Black site acquisition. Origin redacted. Composition unknown. Dr. Kaminsky stood at the observation window, watching readouts climb on the monitor beside her. Temperature fluctuations. Electromagnetic interference. Spatial distortion readings that shouldn't exist outside theoretical physics papers. The air in the chamber carried a smell that filtration couldn't scrub ozone mixed with burning metal sharp enough to taste. The fragment's surface rejected measurement thermal signatures, cycling through spectrums no known energy source produced.
Environmental containment is holding, but we're seeing cascade effects in adjacent sectors. HVAC system is compensating, but we're pushing limits.
The technician's voice came through steady, professional. Kaminsky didn't look away from the glass. Inside the chamber, the object sat motionless. It resembled no material she'd cataloged in 15 years of working with compound feed derivatives. The surface seemed to reject light, bending it in ways that made her eyes ache if she stared too long.
Do we have clearance to adjust containment field intensity?
Kaminsky checked her tablet. The data stream showed increasing instability, but the executive order from 3 floors up had been explicit: maintain observation protocols, no interruptions during the event upstairs. Vaught's biggest PR night of the quarter. Nothing could interfere with the show.
Negative. Hold current parameters. Flag any critical threshold breaches, but maintain position.
The technician nodded, fingers moving across the control panel. Kaminsky watched the readings continue their upward trend and told herself this was normal. Experimental objects always showed volatility. That's why they were experimental. Above, Homelander stepped onto the stage. The crowd's reaction hit like a physical wave, screaming, chanting. 40,000 voices trying to outshout each other for his attention. He landed center stage with perfect form, capes settling around his shoulders, smile ready and practiced. The cameras loved him. The cameras always loved him.
Thank you. Really, thank you all for being here tonight.
His voice carried authority without effort, filling the arena like he owned every inch of air inside it. He paced the stage slowly, making eye contact with sections of the crowd, letting them feel seen.
You know what I see when I look out at all of you? I see Americans who understand what real security looks like. Not politicians making promises, not bureaucrats pushing paper. Real protection, real strength. The kind that doesn't apologize for keeping you safe.
Applause erupted again. Homelander let it wash over him, soaking in the adoration. This was the part he lived for. Not the fights, or the saves, or the photo ops. This. Being worshipped. Being needed. Being the center of a crowd that would burn the world down if he asked them to. 6 floors below the temperature in the containment chamber spiked 3 degrees in 4 seconds. Alarms began their low, insistent beeping. The technician's hands flew across controls, trying to compensate, but the readings kept climbing. Kaminsky stepped closer to the glass, watching the object's surface ripple like liquid metal.
We're approaching critical thermal threshold. Containment field is straining.
Kaminsky grabbed her radio.
Alert environmental systems. Prepare emergency cooling protocols.
But the systems were already trying. Ventilation kicked to maximum, flooding the chamber with refrigerated air that evaporated the moment it entered. The object pulsed once, a deep throb that Kaminsky felt in her chest more than heard. Every screen in the observation room flickered. Lights dimmed for half a second, then surged back brighter than before. On stage, Homelander continued his speech, oblivious to the crisis developing beneath his feet. The crowd hung on every word. The cameras captured every angle. Merchandise continued selling at the concourse. Everything above ground remained perfect, polished, ready for broadcast. Everything below ground started screaming. The containment field collapsed at 9:47 p.m. exactly. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment it existed, a stable electromagnetic barrier holding back whatever the object was trying to become. The next moment, nothing. Just empty space where physics used to apply. The object expanded or unfolded, or tore language, failing to capture what happened because human observation had no framework for it. The glass shattered outward. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 seconds. Frost formed on every surface, and then the first one came through. The technician saw it emerge from behind the object's shadow, a shape that moved wrong limbs, bending at joints that shouldn't exist. He opened his mouth to scream, but his throat had already frozen shut. Kaminsky ran for the emergency exit badge, slapping against the scanner door, refusing to open, because the entire security grid had just crashed. She pounded on the metal, knowing nobody would hear over the alarms, now wailing through every level of the facility. Above, the lights in the arena began their flicker. Just once. Barely noticeable. Most of the crowd didn't even register it. But the emergency exit signs cut out for 3 full seconds before backup power caught them. Homelander paused mid-sentence, head tilting slightly, superhearing, picking up something wrong in the building's rhythm. Then the screaming started. Muffled at first, distant, coming from somewhere the crowd couldn't place. Security guards touched their earpieces, listening to frantic chatter from below. Production assistants looked at each other with growing panic. The crowd sensed the shift, that animal awareness that knows when celebration has turned into something else. The exits became a problem immediately. Not because they were blocked, because 40,000 people all had the same idea at the same moment, and none of them were willing to wait. Shoving turned to pushing. Pushing turned to trampling. The screams from below mixed with screams from the stands as people fell and didn't get back up. Homelander hovered above it all, watching, calculating. He didn't care what was happening in the basement. He cared who would see him react first. Every camera still running, every phone still recording. The moment had to look right before it could be right. In the underground corridors, the things that had come through spread fast. They didn't hunt. Hunting implied strategy. They simply consumed whatever moved. Security teams fired into the shadows. Bullets hit, flesh tore. The things kept coming, Rounds that should have dropped a charging bull only slowed them for seconds before torn muscle knitted back together. The ones who ran made it farther, but not far enough. The facility's locked doors became tombs. The backup generators kicked in too late to matter. One service tunnel led from the sublevels to the loading docks. A maintenance worker found it dragging 2 others with him through the dark. They ran without looking back, hearing wet sounds behind them growing closer. The worker hit the exit door with his shoulder bursting into cold night air and kept running across the parking lot. He glanced back once and saw something massive pull itself through the doorway, too large for the frame, but fitting anyway because geometry had stopped being consistent. 3 blocks away, Vaught's crisis response team was already mobilizing. Black SUVs with tinted windows, operatives in tactical gear. The kind of people who didn't exist in any official capacity, but showed up very quickly when Vaught's reputation needed protecting. The vans hadn't been dispatched. They'd been parked in staging positions since morning standard protocol for any major event. They had templates for this. They always did. The operatives cordoned off the area with practiced efficiency, rerouting traffic, shutting down cell service in a 6-block radius, collecting phones from anyone who looked like they might have filmed something. Inside the arena, Homelander finally moved. He dropped to the stage, grabbed the nearest security chief by the collar, and spoke low enough that the cameras wouldn't catch it.
What the hell is happening in my building?
The security chief stammered something about a containment breach and unauthorized entities and casualties still being assessed. Homelander's eyes began to glow red, just the faintest hint of heat building behind them. Then he stopped, forced the smile back onto his face, and turned to address the crowd.
Folks, we got a minor technical situation. Nothing to worry about. But in the interest of your safety, we're going to ask you to proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion. Nice and calm, that's it. You're all doing great.
Nobody believed him. But the presence of America's strongest hero telling them to stay calm created just enough hesitation that the stampede slowed to a panicked shuffle. People still died in the crush. Just fewer of them. Homelander watched from above, maintaining his smile, hating every single person below him for being weak enough to panic. By midnight, the official story was already forming. Vaught's PR team worked with the efficiency of an organization that had handled worse. Structural failure in an underground storage area. Gas leak. Tragic accident. The death count would be massaged. The footage would be scrubbed. By morning, the narrative would be airtight, and anyone who contradicted it would find themselves having very unfortunate legal troubles. But in the lowest level of the facility, where the walls had started to warp and the air tasted like copper and ash, something remained. The object sat in the ruins of its chamber, no longer contained, no longer observed, simply existing in a space that hadn't learned how to reject it yet. And through the cracks it had opened, more things waited. Patient, inevitable. Ready to inherit a world that thought cameras and capes could protect it from what lived in the spaces between. The last camera drone to leave the arena caught something in its final sweep. Just for a frame. A figure in the service corridor moving against the flow of fleeing staff. Heavy, armored. Green plating visible under emergency lighting. Walking with purpose toward the screaming instead of away from it. The footage would be deleted before it reached any server. But for that single frame, the drone recorded something that didn't belong in Vaught's carefully managed reality. Something that had come looking for the source. The official story went live at 6 a.m. Structural failure in a utility substation. Gas buildup in an abandoned maintenance level. Tragic, but contained. 19 confirmed casualties, all staff. The public had been evacuated safely thanks to Vaught's rapid response protocols. Investigation ongoing. Condolences to families. Questions directed to the press liaison. By 7 a.m. The story was already rotting. Too many people had seen too much. Video clips surfaced on back-channel forums before being scrubbed. Blurry shapes in service hallways, audio of sounds that didn't match gas explosions. The metadata got deleted within minutes, but the damage spread faster than Vought's takedown teams could work. Truth moved like infection now. You couldn't sterilize it completely anymore. Ashley Barrett sat in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor, staring at a crisis dashboard that painted everything red. Social media sentiment analysis showed conspiracy theories outpacing official statements 3-1. Traffic cams revealed gridlock spreading outward from the arena in concentric rings. Emergency services were fielding call volumes that exceeded Hurricane Katrina levels. And the power grid was stuttering across 6 districts with no clear cause.
We're losing narrative control. The overnight team scrubbed 4,000 posts, but we're seeing exponential regrowth. Every takedown is being screenshotted and reposted as proof of cover-up.
The VP of Communications didn't look up from his tablet. His tie was loosened coffee stains on his cuff. He'd been here all night, and it showed.
What about the casualties? Are we containing witness statements?
Ashley's hands shook slightly as she pulled up the internal memo. 37 dead in the initial breach. Another 12 in the evacuation crush. Numbers that would climb once they cleared the sublevels. But those were internal figures. The official count would stay at 19 until legal found a way to compartmentalize the rest.
Families are being offered settlements, standard non-disclosure agreements. We've got 80% compliance so far. The remainder are being handled by special services.
Handled. The word did a lot of work in Vought. It could mean anything from a phone call to something much quieter. Ashley had stopped asking which years ago. On the screen behind her live news feeds showed the perimeter. National Guard had been called in overnight, setting up checkpoints in a half-mile radius around the arena. Official reason, hazmat containment. Real reason, keep cameras out and witnesses in. The feeds showed long lines of cars trying to leave the district going nowhere. Some had been idling for 6 hours. A few had run out of gas and been abandoned in place. Sister Sage walked in without knocking. She never knocked. Her expression carried the same calm it always did, like watching the world burn was just meteorology. She set a folder on the table, 8 pages of analysis that Ashley knew she wouldn't understand, even if she read it twice.
The breach is not contained, it's distributed. We're seeing manifestation events in 4 additional locations, all within the original facility's geothermal footprint.
English, please.
The thing they were studying is still here. It's spreading through infrastructure, sewers, subways, anywhere the old building connected to the new city. Think of it like roots.
Ashley felt her stomach drop. She'd been hoping this was cleanup. Mop the blood, pay the family, spin the story, move on. But Sage's tone suggested something worse. Something that required decisions Ashley wasn't cleared to make.
What's the containment timeline?
There isn't one. Not with current resources.
Sage tapped the folder.
But there's an alternative. We don't contain it. We manage it.
The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade.
Manage how?
Safe zones. Vought-administered shelters in secure buildings. We position soups as protective assets. We make people choose stay outside with whatever's out there or come inside where we control the narrative. Give it 72 hours and they'll be begging us for martial law.
Ashley looked at the VP. He was already nodding. Of course he was. This was opportunity wearing a crisis mask.
Homelander will need to be the face of it. Reassurance, strength, America's protector.
Homelander is compromised.
The room went quiet. You didn't say that out loud. Not about him.
Explain.
He's fixated on the armored individual from last night. The one who went into the sublevels instead of evacuating. Our surveillance caught fragments before the system crashed. Homelander tried to engage verbally, got no response. It's eating him.
So we give him a target, feed him intel, let him handle it, turn it into a win.
No, we keep him away from it. Whatever that thing is, it's not responding to authority. It's not responding to power. It walked past 3 separate soup encounters without acknowledging their existence. Homelander going after it will only make him look weaker when it ignores him again.
Ashley watched Sage's eyes. Cold, calculating, treating people like chess pieces and Homelander like a volatile asset that needed careful handling. Which he was. But hearing it stated so clinically made Ashley's skin crawl. 4 miles east, in an abandoned subway station that hadn't seen passengers in 30 years, something pushed through the wall, not with force, with inevitability. Concrete crumbled like it had been waiting for permission to collapse. The thing that emerged had too many joints and not enough skin. It moved with the efficiency of a predator that had never learned fear, because nothing had ever made it necessary. 3 blocks above, a family of 4 sat in their sedan, stuck in traffic that hadn't moved in 2 hours. The father had tried alternate routes, but every street fed into the same choke point. Detours looped back on themselves. GPS kept recalculating and giving up. The kids were crying. His wife kept refreshing her phone, watching the bars flicker between one signal and none.
We should have left last night.
She didn't answer. What was there to say? They'd tried. The highways had been worse. At least here they were still in the car. Still together. Still hoping the next traffic light would somehow fix everything. The father's phone buzzed. Emergency alert. Vought protection zones now open. Closest location, Tower 7, 1.3 miles northeast. Capacity limited. Bring identification. Shelter provided for law-abiding citizens. He looked at the gridlock ahead. Then at the notification. Then at his kids.
We're going on foot. Grab what you can carry.
They weren't the only ones. All across the affected zone, the same alert hit phones simultaneously. Thousands of people making the same calculation. Stay trapped in cars or trust Vaught's shelters. Most chose the shelters. What choice was there? The alternative was admitting nobody was coming to fix this. Tower 7 was a corporate high-rise that Vought had repurposed overnight. Ground floor gutted furniture, cleared cots, arranged in rows like a field hospital. Soups in costume stood at the entrances, scanning IDs, directing foot traffic, projecting calm authority. Black Noir, too, stood motionless by the main doors, a silent promise of protection that asked no questions and offered no comfort. Inside, people surrendered phones into plastic bins. Signed waivers on tablets with legal text too dense to read. Accepted wristbands that granted access to food, water, medical care. Everything efficient, everything controlled, everything requiring you to agree that Vought knew best. A woman hesitated at the waiver screen, finger hovering over the acceptance button.
What happens if I don't sign?
The Vought staffer smiled. Professional. Practiced.
Then we can't guarantee your safety, but you're free to leave.
The woman looked back at the doors. At the street beyond, where sirens wailed and smoke rose from somewhere unseen. She signed. Everyone signed. The alternative was being outside when night came. In the sub-level maintenance tunnels beneath the city, Frenchie worked by flashlight tracing power cables that shouldn't exist. The boys had been tracking Vaught's response since dawn, looking for gaps in the official story. Huey had pulled building permits cross-referenced with utility records, found infrastructure that didn't match any filed plans. Tunnels that went too deep. Connections that served no listed purpose.
This is not standard electrical. Look at the shielding. This is rated for something that would melt civilian-grade wiring.
Crouched beside him, watching the corridor ahead. They'd seen 3 patrols in the last hour. Vought Special Services, moving fast, extracting something. Bodies maybe, evidence definitely.
We need to move. They're doing sweeps every 20 minutes.
Butcher stood further back, studying a service map they'd lifted from a contractor's van. His jaw worked like he was chewing through bad options.
Frenchie's right. This wasn't an accident. You don't run that kind of power to a storage sublevel unless you're cooking something nasty.
Huey's tablet chirped. He pulled up the alert face, going pale.
Vought just opened safe zones across the district. They're processing thousands of people. This is happening fast. Course it is. Crisis is profit if you own the solution.
Butcher folded the map.
We get evidence, something they can't spin. Then we get out before they decide we're evidence too.
They moved deeper into the tunnel, following the strange cabling, unaware they were walking the same path. Something else had taken hours before. Something that left no footprints, but changed the air in ways that made Frenchie's instruments spike and MM's instincts scream. Above ground, Homelander stood on the roof of Vought Tower, watching the city sprawl beneath him. Smoke in 3 districts. Traffic frozen like a blood clot. His city, his country, his to protect or his to rule the line had always been thin. But something else was moving down there. Something that didn't stop when he'd spoken to it, didn't flinch, didn't even look up, just kept walking like he was furniture. It had been bothering him for hours. That itch under his skin that used to mean someone needed killing. But this was different. This wasn't rage. This was something closer to doubt. The possibility that there existed a problem his heat vision couldn't solve. His phone buzzed, Sage texting instead of calling. Probably because she knew he'd ignore a call. The message was 3 words, "Let it work." He deleted it. Then stood there, fists clenched, staring at the smoke, and hating that he didn't know what she meant. Hating more that he suspected she was right. In the dark places beneath the city, where maintenance tunnels met forgotten infrastructure and the walls wept condensation that didn't smell like water, the armored figure moved without sound. Boots on concrete. Steady, inevitable. Eyes behind the visor tracked movement in the shadows, differentiated threat from environment, calculated the fastest path to what kept calling them here. 3 entities emerged from a collapsed junction drawn by motion. They died in seconds. Efficiently. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The sound of their ending echoed once and stopped. The figure continued forward. No pause to check the kills, no satisfaction in the work. Just progress toward the source, because that's what this was. Work. Nothing more, nothing less. Behind the visor, there were no thoughts of heroism or salvation. Only the knowledge that what had opened here needed to close, and everything protecting it needed to be removed. Simple. Clear. The way it had always been. The way it would be until the job was done. The maps changed overnight. Not officially. Official maps still showed street names and transit lines, like the city was whole. But the internal ones, the ones Vought circulated in executive briefings, told a different story. Gray zones spreading across 6 districts. Areas marked under assessment, which meant nobody was assessing anything because nobody was going in. Digital overlays showed cellular dead spots expanding like mold. Power substations offline. Water pressure dropping to 0 in quadrants that used to hold 30,000 people. Nobody called them lost. The language stayed clinical, non-viable, inaccessible, pending resource allocation. Words that meant the same thing without saying it. Those places didn't matter anymore, because saving them would cost more than letting them die. Ashley stood in the operations center, watching the gray spread in real time. Each pixel represented a block. Each block represented lives that Vaught's algorithms had already written off. The math was clean. Brutal, but clean. Protect what could be protected. Contain what could be contained. Abandon the rest and make sure the footage never showed bodies.
How many in the exclusion perimeter?
The data analyst didn't look up from his terminal.
Estimated 14,000 when we drew the line. Current population unknown. Last drone pass was 6 hours ago. We lost 3 units to equipment failure.
Equipment failure. Another clean word for things that fell out of the sky when they flew too close to certain streets. Ashley had watched the footage before it got classified. The drones didn't malfunction. They just stopped being machines. Fell like birds shot mid-flight electronics, corrupting in ways that made technicians go quiet and refuse to speculate.
What about ground teams? We pulled the last extraction crew at 0400. They reported visual anomalies and communication degradation. Recommendation was full withdrawal pending improved intelligence.
Translation: the mercs saw something that scared them more than their paychecks. And Vought didn't argue. Smart. You didn't pay people enough to walk into places where physics started forgetting its own rules. 3 miles west, Tower 7 Safe Zone processed its 2,000th resident. The line stretched 4 blocks, people clutching bags and children waiting for their turn to trade freedom for shelter. The soups at the entrance kept smiling, kept the process moving, kept projecting strength, while their earpieces fed them updates about zones going dark and response teams refusing deployment. Black Noir, too, stood sentinel at the main checkpoint, a statue in combat gear. People found his silence reassuring. They didn't know it wasn't discipline. He'd been ordered not to speak because every time someone asked him a direct question about what was happening in the restricted zones, his answers made them panic. Better to stand mute and let people project their own comfort onto the void. Inside, families filled cots arranged in rows that stretched to the back wall. Medical stations dispensed antibiotics and bandages. Food service operated on 2-hour rotations. Everything running smooth, except for the detail. Nobody mentioned the windows were sealed. Not locked. Sealed. Industrial adhesive and steel shutters. Fire exits chained with the kind of locks that didn't open from inside without a Vought security override, one man noticed. Tried the emergency bar on the east stairwell and found it welded shut. He asked a staffer about fire code. Got a smile and a lie about temporary security measures. He didn't push. The alternative was outside, and outside had stopped being an option around the time the screaming in the next district over went quiet. The quiet was worse than the noise. At least noise meant people were still alive enough to make sound. When a residential zone went silent in the middle of the day, it meant something had finished working through it. Vaught's aerial surveillance confirmed what the silence suggested. Streets empty, cars, abandoned mid-intersection doors hanging open like mouths. No bodies, just absence, like everyone had been erased between one moment and the next. Frenchie crouched in the maintenance subway tunnel, running diagnostics on air samples that made his equipment read numbers it wasn't designed for. Particulate concentrations that didn't match any industrial pollutant. Trace elements that shouldn't exist outside a particle accelerator. He scraped residue from the wall and sealed it in a specimen tube, already knowing no lab would touch this without asking questions he couldn't answer.
We need to leave. This tunnel connects to the southeast blackout zone. Whatever's there, it's been here.
Watched the darkness ahead, rifle raised, but knowing it wouldn't matter. You couldn't shoot what you couldn't see coming. They'd already passed 3 service stations that should have had crew. Found tools, still warm coffee, still hot, no sign of struggle. Just empty rooms with lights that flickered in patterns that hurt to watch too long. Butcher studied the infrastructure map, tracing connections between Vault's sub-levels and the old transit network. Every dark zone connected to a tunnel. Every tunnel led back to the original breach site. Whatever they'd opened wasn't spreading randomly. It was following paths. Old paths. Like it knew the way.
This ain't containment failure, this is navigation.
Huey pulled up building schematics on his tablet, cross-referencing against the gray zones on Vaught's leaked internal map.
They're not trying to stop it, they're corralling it. Look at the safe zones, they're all positioned around key infrastructure. They're not protecting people, they're protecting assets. Of course they are. Vought doesn't do rescue, they do damage control with photo ops.
A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Not mechanical, not animal. something between the two like metal scraping across bone. MM's finger moved to the trigger.
Time to move, now.
They retreated, fast boots splashing through water that had started to smell wrong. Behind them, the sound grew closer. Not chasing, just existing in the same space, moving with the same terrible patience as everything else down here. When they hit the service ladder and climbed towards street level, none of them looked back. Some things you didn't gain anything from seeing. On the surface, daylight felt like a lie. The sun was out. Traffic signals still cycled through their patterns in neighborhoods that worked. People walked dogs and bought coffee 2 miles from zones where reality had started to come apart. The disconnect was surreal. Horror wearing normal skin. A family tried to cross into one of the gray zones to reach their apartment. Needed medication left behind in the initial evacuation. National Guard checkpoint turned them away. No exceptions. The father argued until a sergeant pulled him aside and showed him drone footage from 3 hours ago. The father went pale, stopped arguing, walked his family back toward the safe zone without another word. The sergeant deleted the footage 30 seconds later. Orders. In the Vought executive suite, Sister Sage presented her consolidated strategy to a room of people who'd stopped pretending this was temporary. Her tone never shifted from the clinical efficiency she always carried. Emotions were tools. Right now, the tool required was cold mathematics.
Current projections show stabilization in 48 hours if we maintain resource allocation to secured zones and accept losses in non-viable sectors. Public narrative is holding. 82% of surveyed populations believe this is a containable terrorist event. We maintain that perception.
What about the thing in the sub-levels, the one Homelander flagged?
Still active, still mobile, still unresponsive to engagement attempts.
Meaning
It's not a player, it's a variable. It eliminates targets that interfere with its objective, whatever that is. Our people who stay out of its path survive. Those who don't.
Ashley's stomach turned. Sage was talking about human lives like they were chess pieces that removed themselves from the board. But nobody in the room objected, because objecting meant admitting they should care more than they did. And caring didn't stop the gray zones from spreading.
so we just let it do whatever it's doing.
We let it continue until it becomes a problem for our optics. Right now it's not on camera, not in the narrative. It's functionally invisible to the public. That's acceptable.
Homelander wasn't in the meeting. He was on the roof, 300 feet above street level, watching smoke rise from a district Vought had officially declared stabilized. His hearing picked up gunfire from the supposedly secure perimeter. His vision tracked movement in buildings that should have been evacuated. He could go down there, end it in minutes, be the hero they kept saying he was. But Sage's last text sat in his phone like a splinter. Optics first, power second, always. He hated that she was right. Hated that flying into a gray zone to fight things nobody could film would just make him look desperate. Better to stay visible where it mattered. Let the cameras see him protecting the safe zones. Let the narrative stay clean, even if the truth was rotting 3 blocks over. His fists clenched. Somewhere in the city below, the armored figure was still moving, still ignoring him, still making Homelander feel like furniture in his own city. That couldn't stand. Not forever. Eventually, he'd have to make it acknowledge him. Make it look up. Make it understand that Homelander wasn't background noise. But not yet. Not while Sage was still managing him like an asset instead of a god. In the deep infrastructure beneath the failing zones, the armored figure methodically cleared another junction. 3 entities eliminated with the same efficiency as every engagement before. No trophies. No pauses. Just forward momentum. The visor tracked thermal signatures, identified threats, calculated optimal termination vectors. The path ahead descended. Old construction pre-modern era, leading into substrata that city planning had forgotten or deliberately buried. The visor's HUD marked it higher concentration of the signature, closer to origin. Every step down was a step toward the source. A civilian stumbled into the corridor, fleeing from something behind him, saw the armored figure, froze, opened his mouth to speak. The figure walked past without breaking stride. The man wasn't a threat, wasn't relevant. Survival was his own problem. The figure had one function: locate and terminate the source. Everything else was noise. The man pressed himself against the wall as the figure disappeared into the darkness ahead. Heard sounds shortly after. Wet, final. Then silence. He ran the other direction, toward the light, toward anywhere that thing wasn't. He'd tell people later, but nobody would believe the part about the eyes behind the visor. How they didn't look human. Didn't look angry or afraid or anything. Just looked through you like you weren't there, like nothing was there except the job. Back in the operations center, a technician flagged something on the main display. A new gray zone forming faster than the models predicted, expanding outward from a collapsed tenement in the eastern quadrant. Live feeds showed windows going dark floor by floor. People running, then not running, then nothing.
Do we have teams in range? Negative. Closest unit is 40 minutes out and refuses approach without armored support. Then mark it non-viable and update the exclusion map.
The technician's hand hesitated over the keyboard. Once he clicked that button, everyone in that zone became a statistic instead of a rescue priority. He clicked it anyway, because that's what the job required. That's what survival required. You saved who you could and stopped counting who you couldn't. The gray spread another 6 blocks on the display. Silent. Inevitable. Like a tide nobody knew how to turn back. Ashley watched the numbers tick up and felt nothing. That scared her more than the crisis itself. The part of her that should have cared had gone numb somewhere around hour 36 of this nightmare. Now, she just watched the maps change and waited for someone to tell her what lie to tell next. Outside the tower, the sun set on a city that looked normal from a distance. Lights in some zones, darkness in others. But darkness could mean a lot of things. Power outage, curfew, nothing to worry about. The people in the safe zones told themselves that, told their kids that, told anyone who'd listen. The people in the gray zones didn't tell anyone anything. They were too busy learning that some kinds of dark don't end when morning comes. That some things only look like night because looking directly at them would break something in your head that you need to keep living. And somewhere between the light and the dark, the armored figure kept moving. Down, always down, toward the source, toward the reason. Toward the only thing that mattered in a world that had stopped making sense to everyone, except the one who'd seen this pattern before and knew exactly how it ended. It ended when the source died. Everything else was just logistics. The reports started coming in around dawn. Not from Vaught's official channels. Those stayed silent, controlled, feeding the public narrative about containment and recovery efforts. The real reports came through back channels, encrypted frequencies used by field operatives who'd stopped trusting headquarters to tell them what they were actually dealing with. 3 separate teams had tracked movement in the restricted sectors overnight. None made direct contact. What they found, instead, were sites that looked like something had passed through and decided to simplify the geography. A warehouse that used to house nests of the entities was now just empty space. No bodies, no remains, just concrete stained dark and walls that showed impact patterns, suggesting extreme force applied with surgical precision. One operative's body cam caught footage before the system corrupted, 43 seconds of thermal imaging showing a lone signature moving through a condemned apartment complex. Temperature readings cycling through impossible ranges. Then entities converging from 3 floors. Then the signature remaining constant while everything else disappeared from the sensors. Footage ended with equipment failure. The operative extracted himself and refused reassignment to that sector. Vaught's intelligence division compiled the data in a classified brief that reached executive level by 0600. 12 incidents, same pattern. Solo operator heavy armor configuration, 0 communication attempts, complete elimination of hostile presence in affected areas. No civilian casualties reported, but also no evidence of civilian rescue protocols. The operator's objective appeared singular target eradication, nothing else.
Do we have identification?
The analyst pulled up what they had. Fragments, thermal silhouette, armor composition resistant to standard sensor packages, movement pattern suggesting enhanced strength but not supernatural. Weapon discharge signatures that didn't match any cataloged ordnance.
Nothing. We have nothing actionable. We have a vector. It's moving toward concentrations of hostile activity, predictable enough to position assets for intercept.
Ashley watched the briefing from the back of the room, feeling the conversation tilt toward something she recognized. Vaught didn't handle unknowns well. They either controlled them, weaponized them, or eliminated them. This thing was rapidly approaching the threshold where headquarters would have to choose.
We're not engaging it.
Sister Sage stood at the front, her tablet showing trajectory analysis that painted a clearer picture than anyone else had managed.
This operator is solving a problem we can't. Every zone it clears reduces our resource burden. Every hostile it eliminates is one less variable in an equation that's already beyond our computational capacity. We don't interfere. We document and stay out of its path.
And if it decides to turn that efficiency toward us,
Then we were already dead, we just didn't know it yet. This thing kills with a purpose we don't understand. As long as that purpose aligns with hostile elimination, we benefit from its existence.
The logic was ice. But nobody argued, because Sage was right and everyone in that room knew it. They were watching something operate outside their framework. And the smartest play was to let it keep working until it became their problem instead of their solution. 4 miles south, the boys navigated a service passage that morning light couldn't reach. MM's rifle swept corners out of habit, knowing the weapon was psychological comfort more than practical defense. Huey stayed close to Frenchie, who held a radiation detector that kept spiking into ranges that made him mutter in French.
whatever was through here left a signature. Argent-adjacent particles, ionization patterns, thermal scarring on surfaces that should not retain heat. English, mate. Something very hot and very focused came through this corridor. Recently.
Butcher studied the walls. Scorch marks in patterns that suggested projected energy. But the distribution was too clean, too contained. Not area denial, more like pest control. One wall showed an impact crater, deep, focused, like something had been pinned there with enough force to crack the concrete, then removed completely.
Whatever made this, it wasn't fighting, it was working.
They moved deeper, following the trail of evidence that grew more disturbing the further they went. Not because it was chaotic, because it was systematic. Every kill site showed the same efficiency. No wasted movement, no collateral damage beyond what was necessary to terminate the target. The precision was inhuman. Not in the sense of cruelty, but in the absence of anything except function. Huey found something that made him stop. A section of floor where the concrete had been superheated, then cooled, leaving a glassed surface. In the center, a boot print, heavy, treaded, not military standard. He pulled out his phone and photographed it before Aunt MM grabbed his wrist.
No digital records, not of this. Why? 'Cause whatever made that print, I don't want knowing we're tracking it.
The words hung there. Fear from MM. The man who'd stared down soups and corpo death squads without flinching. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy you could fight or a problem you could solve. This was something that existed in its own category, and the smartest move was to not be noticed. They extracted from the passage before the feeling of being watched became unbearable. None of them spoke about it afterward. Some things you didn't discuss, because giving them words made them more real than you could handle. At 1100 hours, Homelander flew a patrol over the eastern sectors. The approved route kept him visible to street-level cameras, projecting strength and control for the news feeds, but he deviated, dropped altitude, followed the pattern Sage's briefing had outlined. He found the first cleared site within 10 minutes. A transit station that had been overrun 2 days ago. Now empty. The entities that had nested there were gone. Not scattered. Gone. The walls showed evidence of systematic elimination, room by room, methodical, complete. His jaw clenched. This was his city, his responsibility, his moment. And something was in here doing the work without permission, without acknowledgement, without even the basic courtesy of looking up when the world's strongest hero flew overhead. He heard movement below. Dropped through a broken skylight, landed in the station's main concourse. The sound came from the north tunnel. Heavy footfalls, regular, unhurried. The armored figure emerged from the darkness. Didn't stop. Didn't react to Homelander's presence. Just kept walking with the same steady pace, visor tracking forward weapons, maglock to the armor, in configurations that suggested recent use.
Hey, I'm talking to you.
Nothing. The figure angled toward a service exit, moving around Homelander like he was architecture. Not a threat, not an ally, just an obstacle to path efficiently around. Homelander's eyes began to glow red. Not firing, just the threat, the warning, the demand for acknowledgement that he was used to receiving from everything that wanted to keep living. The figure paused, half a second. Visor angled fractionally toward Homelander. Assessment, calculation, then dismissed, continued walking, exited through the service door and disappeared into the infrastructure beyond. Homelander stood there, fists clenched, eyes still glowing, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Worse. Irrelevance. The thing had looked at him and decided he didn't matter. Wasn't part of the equation. Wasn't worth the time it would take to engage. He put his fist through a concrete pillar. Then another. Then flew straight up through the skylight, hard enough to shatter what remained of the glass, needing altitude and distance before he did something that cameras would catch and Sage would have to spin. By nightfall, 3 more sectors had been cleared. Vaught's tracking team confirmed the pattern. The operator moved in expanding spirals, prioritizing high-concentration nests, eliminating, systematically never doubling back. Like it was following a checklist only it could see. Attempts to make contact failed. Drone surveillance lost signal when it got within 50 meters. Ground teams reported equipment malfunction and visual distortion. One team got close enough to attempt verbal communication. The operator walked past them without slowing. Didn't stop until it reached its target, eliminated the threat, and continued its pattern. The team leader filed a report that got classified within an hour. His description of the operator's eyes behind the visor. How they didn't track like human eyes, didn't show emotion or recognition. Just scanned, assessed, prioritized. Like looking into the optics of a machine that had learned to hunt. In the executive suite, Ashley updated the tactical display. Cleared zones in green, active hostile zones in red. The operator's projected path in yellow. The yellow line cut through the red zones like surgical incisions, turning them green one by one. Efficient, relentless, unstoppable.
At this rate, hostile presence in the accessible sectors will be eliminated within 72 hours.
The VP of Operations didn't sound relieved. He sounded worried.
And then what does it do when there's nothing left to kill?
Sage didn't look up from her tablet.
It leaves, or it finds the source. Either way, it stops being our problem.
You're assuming it has limits.
Everything has limits. We just haven't found this one's yet. Until we do, we let it work.
In a sector marked non-viable on official maps, the armored figure descended another level. The architecture changed here. Older, pre-modern, stone and iron instead of concrete and steel. The air carried signatures that made the visor's sensors spike into warning ranges. Closer. The concentration was stronger here. Not scattered nests, but something centralized. Something that had learned to fortify. The visor tracked movement in the shadows ahead. Multiple signatures. Organized. Defending. The figure's hand moved to a weapon. Stance shifted fractionally. Not preparation for a fight. Preparation for work that would take longer than usual. But in the same way everything else had ended. Forward motion resumed. Steady, inevitable. The entities ahead could run or fight or try to negotiate in whatever way they understood communication. It wouldn't matter. The outcome was already determined. The only variable was how long it took. Behind the visor there was no anticipation, no anger, no satisfaction. Just the recognition that this was one step closer to the objective. One more obstacle to remove. One more section of the checklist to complete. And when the checklist was done, when the source was eliminated and the breach was sealed, then this world could return to whatever problems it had before hell decided to visit. Until then, there was only work. And work didn't care who watched, or who approved, or who tried to take credit afterward. Work just got done. The thing about controlling hell is that you need hell to stay controllable, not eliminated, not sealed, just managed. A threat severe enough to justify emergency powers, but contained enough to prove those powers work. Sister Sage understood this. She'd been explaining it to executives who thought they were smart for 3 days now. The morning briefing showed the updated containment perimeter. Tighter than yesterday, more efficient. Hostile presence consolidated into predictable corridors that could be monitored, measured, maintained. The armored individual had cleared 17 nests in 72 hours. Vaught's projections suggested complete eradication within the week if the current pace held. That couldn't happen.
We need to redirect the operator's trajectory, not confrontation. Misdirection. False signals indicating hostile concentrations in sectors away from the primary breach site.
You want to keep the source active.
I want to keep the crisis viable. Complete resolution removes justification for expanded authority. We're 3 signatures away from federal emergency designation. That gives us carte blanche on surveillance resource allocation and soup deployment protocols. But only if the threat persists.
Ashley felt sick. She'd suspected. But hearing it stated plainly, hearing Sage calmly explain why they needed people to keep dying, made the abstract horror concrete.
What if the operator doesn't follow the misdirection?
Then we make it impossible to reach the source without going through assets we control. Homelander, specifically. Position him as the final barrier. If the operator wants to close the breach, it has to acknowledge our authority first.
The VP of Operations leaned forward.
You're gambling that thing will negotiate.
I'm gambling it won't kill Homelander without provocation. Everything we've observed suggests target discrimination. It eliminates what threatens it or obstructs its objective. Homelander standing in its path forces a decision, acknowledge us, or escalate to include human targets.
And if it escalates?
Then we have footage of an unknown hostile attacking America's protector. Either way, we control the narrative.
The mathematics were perfect. The morality was absent. Sage closed her tablet and left the room like she'd just scheduled a routine inspection instead of weaponizing humanity's strongest hero as bait. At Safe Zone Epsilon, the selection process had evolved from screening to sorting. Medical checks became ideological tests. Background verification became loyalty assessment. The families who made it through the gates were the ones who signed the right waivers, agreed to the right terms, and didn't ask questions about the ones who got turned away. The fence line showed the cost of rejection. Bodies left where they fell just outside the perimeter, close enough to see safety, but too far to reach it. The entities came at night, dragged them into darkness, left stains on concrete that morning crews scrubbed away, before the residents woke and saw what their shelter required. A woman stood at the checkpoint, documents in hand, daughter clutching her leg. The guard scanned her ID and frowned.
Employment history shows union organizing. 3 citations for civil disobedience. Denied.
The woman's face went pale.
Please, we have nowhere else. Appeal to regional processing. Next.
The guard didn't watch her leave. Didn't see her try the next gate and get the same answer. Didn't see her collapse in the street 2 blocks away, holding her daughter, trying to decide if running into the dark was better than waiting for the dark to come to them. The guard's job was processing, not caring. Caring made it harder to deny entry to the next person and the next and the next. Inside the fence, life approximated normal. Rations distributed, children playing in supervised areas. Entertainment screens showing VOT programming about heroes and hope and inevitable victory. Nobody talked about the smell that drifted over the walls at night. Nobody asked why the fence had started growing barbed wire pointing inward instead of out. 4 miles north. The boys watched a convoy roll past their hiding spot. VOT transport trucks armored heading toward the central breach site. Huey's scanner picked up electromagnetic signatures that matched the fragment from the original incident. They weren't evacuating it. They were bringing in equipment to stabilize it.
They're keeping it open.
Butcher's jaw worked. He'd suspected. But confirmation still hit like a gut punch.
Of course they are. Crisis is profit. Fear is control. Close the gate and people stop begging to be saved.
Frenchie pulled up schematics on his tablet, overlaying them with the convoy's route.
They are reinforcing the breach chamber, not to seal, to maintain. This requires precision engineering. They have been planning this.
MM checked his rifle, knowing the gesture was futile. You didn't stop VOT convoys with small arms. You didn't stop VOT, period. You just documented their crimes and hoped someday someone cared enough to prosecute.
We need proof. Something that can't be spun. We need a miracle. Proof means nothing when they own the cameras.
The convoy disappeared into the restricted perimeter. The boys stayed in the shadows, watching, documenting, knowing they were recording evidence that would never see a courtroom. Because the people who'd need to prosecute were the same ones signing off on this atrocity. Huey's hands shook as he saved the footage. They'd seen VOT do terrible things. Cover-ups, murders, exploitation. But this was different. This was deliberate apocalypse management. This was deciding that human suffering was an acceptable resource, as long as it generated the right political capital.
We should have stopped them. How were 4 people with gear we stole and evidence nobody will believe? We're not stopping anything. We're just witnesses.
The truth of it settled heavy. They'd spent years fighting VOT, and VOT was still here, still winning. Still turning disasters into opportunities while people died in the margins of their spreadsheets. Deep below street level, the armored figure descended through layers of abandoned infrastructure. The path narrowed. Older construction. Stone worked by hands instead of machines. The concentration of the signature grew stronger with each level. Close now. The source was close. Then the passage ended. Not collapsed. Blocked. Recent construction, reinforced steel, electronic locks, VOT security protocols. The visor scanned the barrier, analyzing composition, calculating breach time. 14 minutes with available equipment. Acceptable. Then signatures appeared behind the barrier. Human. 3. Armed. Guarding. The figure paused. Reassessed. Humans defending the breach. Not fleeing from entities. Not trapped. Defending. Keeping it open. The logic chain completed. The breach wasn't an accident being managed. It was an asset being protected. The target classification shifted. Entities were one problem. Humans weaponizing the breach were another. The solution remained identical. Remove the obstacle, seal the source, but the obstacle now included anything maintaining the gateway. The figure withdrew. Not retreat. Recalculation. New approach required. The guards would be replaced. The barriers would be defended. Direct assault would alert the broader protection network. Inefficient. Better to remove the authority maintaining the breach. Remove the command structure. The guards would disperse. The barriers would fall. The source could be reached. The visor tracked thermal signatures back toward populated sectors. Identified concentrations of organized human activity, cross-referenced with observed patterns of control. One signature stood out. Higher temperature, higher altitude, constant aerial patrol, broadcasting position, demanding attention. That one. Remove that one and the structure would fracture. Homelander hovered over the central district performing his assigned patrol. Cameras tracked him from 3 angles. Live feeds showed him protecting the city. The optics were perfect. The reality was that he was bored angry and looking for something to break that wouldn't damage the narrative. His phone buzzed. Sage.
Position yourself at the central breach entrance. The target is approaching. Do not engage, just block its path. Force it to acknowledge your presence.
His eyes narrowed. She was using him as bait, positioning him like a chess piece. He should refuse. Show her he didn't take orders. But the thought of finally getting that thing to look at him, to acknowledge him, to understand that Homelander mattered in this equation, that was worth playing along. He flew to the breach site, landed at the main entrance, crossed his arms, waited. The armored figure emerged from a maintenance access 20 minutes later. Saw Homelander. Didn't stop. Changed angle. Moved toward an alternate entry.
I said stop.
The figure paused. Visor turned fractionally toward Homelander. Assessment? Calculation?
This is my city, my jurisdiction. You don't go anywhere without my permission.
The figure's stance shifted. Not aggressive. Evaluative. Measuring. The visor tracked Homelander's position. Heat signature. Power output. Threat level. Then dismissed. Continued walking. Homelander's eyes flared red. Heat vision carved into the ground, directly in the figure's path. Concrete melted. A line drawn.
I'm not asking.
The figure stopped. Looked at the molten line. Looked at Homelander. The visor's glow intensified slightly. Re-evaluation. This wasn't an obstacle that would move. This was a barrier that required removal. For the first time since arriving in this world, the armored figure altered its loadout. Weapons systems activated. Targeting protocols engaged. Not for entities, for the obstacle currently preventing objective completion. Homelander saw the shift. Saw weapons come online. Felt the thrill of finally being taken seriously. Being seen as a threat worth preparing for.
There we go. Now we're talking.
The figure didn't respond. Just calculated. Threat assessment complete. Solution determined. Engagement parameters set. This target was maintaining the breach through authority and force. Removing it would destabilize the protection network. Allow access to the source. Complete the objective. The math was clean. The execution would be efficient. Behind the visor, there was no anger, no personal stake. Just recognition that Homelander had classified himself as part of the problem. And problems got solved. The standoff held, neither moving. Both committed to paths that couldn't coexist. The city around them continued its slow collapse, people dying in the margins, while two forces stood opposed over who got to decide how hell stayed managed. Somewhere in Vought Tower, Sister Sage watched the drone feed and smiled. Perfect. Exactly as calculated. The operator would either submit to Homelander's authority and legitimize Vaught's control, or it would attack and give them their hostile footage. She didn't consider the third option. The one where the operator decided that Homelander wasn't an authority to respect or a threat to fear. Just another obstacle. Another piece of the machinery keeping the breach open. Another target. The wind shifted. Carried the smell of burning from the active zones. Sirens wailed in the distance. The standoff continued. And in the space between two implacable forces, the city held its breath and wondered which monster would blink first. Neither would. That was the problem. That's what made the next 72 hours inevitable. The confrontation didn't announce itself with speeches or fanfare. It started the way most violence does, with proximity and incompatible objectives. Homelander stood at the entrance to the subterranean complex, exactly where Sage had positioned him. The armored figure approached from the east access corridor, weapons inactive, but ready movement steady and inevitable as tides. 20 meters separated them, then 10, then 5.
Last chance, turn around.
The figure didn't slow, didn't acknowledge. Just continued forward with the same mechanical certainty it had shown for every other obstacle in its path. Homelander was furniture, architecture, something to move through or around, but not something that mattered. That calculus was about to correct itself. Homelander's eyes flared bright. Heat vision carved through the space between them, not aimed at the figure, but at the ground ahead. Concrete exploded. Molten stone sprayed upward, creating a barrier of superheated debris. A warning, a line, a demand. The figure stopped. Assessed the new terrain. Calculated alternate paths. Found none that didn't require going through the obstacle, currently generating lethal temperatures with eye contact alone. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Two forces existed in the same space with mutually exclusive goals. The math couldn't balance. Something had to give. The figure's weapon systems activated. Targeting overlay engaged. Threat assessment completed. Subject classification, hostile maintaining position, projecting force, blocking objective. Solution determined. Homelander saw the shift in stance. Saw combat readiness replace navigational mode, finally. Finally, someone who understood he wasn't background noise. Someone who saw him and decided to fight anyway. The validation felt better than it should have.
There we go. Now we are having a conversation.
The figure didn't respond. Just moved. Not a charge, not an attack. A closing of distance with optimal efficiency. 3 steps and the gap collapsed. Homelander swung first. Super strength concentrated in his fist, enough force to crack a tank. The blow connected with the figure's shoulder should have shattered bone and sent the target flying. Instead, armor absorbed the impact, distributed the energy, held position. The figure rocked back 6 inches, reset, continued forward. Homelander blinked. That punch had never failed before. Nothing took that hit and kept walking. Nothing human. The figure's counter came low, targeted, aimed for structure, not spectacle. A strike to Homelander's knee, precisely angled to hyperextend the joint. Homelander's durability held, but the intent registered. This wasn't fighting. This was dismantling. Breaking down a problem into components that could be neutralized. He grabbed the figure's arm, leveraged his flight through with enough force to embed a person in concrete. The figure hit the wall, cracked it, dropped to a crouch, and immediately stood. No hesitation, no pain response, just threat reassessment and renewed approach.
What the hell are you?
No answer. The figure closed again. This time weapons deployed. Not firearms, impact tools. A gauntlet wreathed in energy that read as thermal distortion on Homelander's enhanced vision. The strike came fast, professional, aimed at his head. He dodged, barely. Felt heat wash past his face. The wall behind him didn't just crack, it cauterized. Molecular structure altered by whatever that gauntlet was generating. He'd felt compound 5 enhancements before. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely. His heat vision lanced out, full intensity. The kind that melted steel and vaporized bone. It hit the figure center mass, should have carved through armor and flesh. Instead, the energy diffused across the plating, absorbed and dispersed, leaving scorch marks but no penetration. The figure weathered it, walked through it, closed to grappling range while Homelander was still processing that his strongest ranged option had failed. They collided. Not the cinematic clash of titans, just brutal close-quarters violence. Homelander used every advantage strength-speed flight, grabbed the figure and launched upward, accelerating to terminal velocity in 3 seconds, planning to drop it from altitude and watch it crater. The figure's gauntlet locked onto a support beam mid-ascent. Momentum arrested. Homelander's grip broke. He spun in midair, reoriented, saw the figure drop back to ground level with controlled descent via some mechanism he couldn't identify. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Homelander didn't struggle. Homelander didn't adapt. He showed up, he won, he left. That was the pattern. That was the rule. The figure was rewriting rules with each exchange. He dove, full speed, hit the figure like a missile. The impact created a shockwave that shattered windows 2 blocks away. They crashed through a wall, then another tumbling into a maintenance bay, filled with forgotten equipment and decades of dust. Homelander recovered first, planted his boot on the figure's chest, pinned it prepared to finally do what needed doing. Heat vision at point-blank range. No dodging, no absorbing. Just overwhelming force until the problem stopped existing. The figure's hand moved, faster than Homelander tracked. Something small and cylindrical appeared. Deployed. A device that read wrong on every sense he possessed. The explosion wasn't large, wasn't meant to be. It was precisely calibrated. A directed energy pulse that hit Homelander's inner ear like a sledgehammer. His equilibrium shattered. The world spun. He staggered back, vision blurring, hearing replaced with a high-pitched whine that made thought difficult. By the time his senses cleared, the figure was already standing, already moving, not toward Homelander, toward the original objective, the entrance, the path to the source.
I'm not done with you.
The figure ignored him, made 3 steps before Homelander recovered enough to intercept, grabbed it from behind flight-active acceleration building. If it wanted the source, it could visit it from the upper atmosphere after impact velocity tenderized that armor. They shot upward, through the ceiling, through the floor above that, up into open air. The city spread below them, burning in patches, dark in others, dying in real time, while 2 forces fought over which one got to decide its fate. At 2,000 feet, the figure activated something else. Retro thrusters, counter thrust. They weren't flying, Homelander was. And now his passenger was resisting with enough force to arrest their climb. They hung there, Homelander straining to maintain altitude, the figure calculating. Then a component on the armor's back detached, small, dense, falling. Homelander's enhanced vision tracked it, watched it drop toward a cluster of buildings, toward people, civilians, dozens of them. The calculation was instant and sickening. Drop the figure and save them, or maintain the fight and let them die. The figure knew, had engineered this exact dilemma. He cursed, released his grip, dove after the falling object, caught it 50 feet from impact, absorbed its momentum, landed hard enough to crack pavement. When he looked up, the figure was gone. Not fleeing, relocating, finding another path to the objective, while Homelander held an inert component that had never been a bomb at all. Just wait, just bait. He'd been played. Tactically outmaneuvered by something that didn't speak, didn't threaten, didn't do anything except execute a plan with the assumption that Homelander would follow predictable patterns. His fists clenched. The component in his hand crumpled. This wasn't over. This was postponed. And the next time there wouldn't be civilians to exploit. The next time nothing would interrupt until one of them stopped moving. 3 miles away, the armored figure accessed an alternate route. The confrontation had provided data. Threat level assessed. Combat parameters established. Subject showed significant offensive capability but predictable behavior. Used power without precision. Relied on superiority rather than adaptation. Exploitable. The figure descended through maintenance access, resuming the original trajectory with minor adjustments. The obstacle had been tested. It could be overcome. Just required proper application of force and tactical patience. Emotion didn't enter the calculation. Homelander wasn't an enemy in any personal sense. Just a variable requiring specific solutions. Those solutions existed. They would be applied. The objective would be reached. Everything else was noise. In Vought Tower Sister, San watched the drone footage with clinical interest. The engagement had lasted 4 minutes. Neither side had achieved dominance. Homelander had failed to eliminate the threat. The operator had failed to reach its objective. Status quo maintained, except that wasn't quite true. Homelander had fought something and failed to instantly win. That fact would metastasize in his psyche. The next engagement wouldn't be about protecting the breach. It would be about proving he could destroy what had resisted him. Predictable, useful. As long as she could keep him focused on the operator instead of recognizing the real enemy, Vaught's management of the crisis itself. The footage looped. She studied the figure's movements. Professional, efficient, not superhuman in the Compound 5 sense. Something else. Something with training and equipment that suggested resources beyond what this world typically produced. A variable she didn't control. That needed to change. But first let it and Homelander grind against each other. Let them both believe the fight mattered. Meanwhile, the breach stayed open, the crisis stayed viable, and Vaught's position strengthened with each passing day. Ashley entered the room, tablet in hand, face ashen.
We have a problem. The southeastern perimeter just collapsed. Hostile entities breached 3 safe zones simultaneously. Casualties estimated in the hundreds. And it's spreading.
Sage's expression didn't change. She pulled up the tactical display. Saw the red expanding across sectors they'd thought secured. Not random. Coordinated. Like the entities had learned. Adapted. Stopped being prey and started being something else.
Redirect all available assets, Homelander included. This takes priority over the operator.
He's already en route. He saw the feeds.
Of course he did. Because killing entities on camera was what he did. What he needed. The validation he craved. But Sage knew what he'd really be thinking about. Not the entities, not the civilians, just the armored figure. Just the thing that had walked away from him like he was irrelevant. That obsession would be useful, right up until it wasn't. The tactical display continued updating, red spreading, green shrinking. The crisis they'd been managing was starting to manage them. And somewhere in the infrastructure below, 2 predators circled each other. Both convinced they were the hunter, neither recognizing they were fighting over territory that was already lost. The safe zone perimeter collapsed at 0300. Not from external pressure, from internal failure. Too many people packed into infrastructure designed for half the capacity. Too many promises that safety was guaranteed. Too many lies stacked on top of each other until the weight became structural. The entities poured through gaps in the fencing drawn by concentration and fear. Black Noir 2 engaged, first killed 3. Before the 4th tore through his armor plating and found the flesh underneath. He lasted 14 seconds, long enough to understand he wasn't the predator anymore. Not long enough to run. Firecracker fired into the mass until her ammunition ran dry, then tried hand-to-hand, then tried screaming. None of it mattered. The entities didn't care about noise or bravado or threats. They just consumed what was in front of them and moved to the next meal. Homelander arrived to find the perimeter already lost. Hundreds dead. Thousands fleeing into sectors that offered no better protection. He killed entities by the dozen, heat vision carving through them, fists pulverizing whatever his rage could reach. But for every 10, he destroyed 20 more emerged from the infrastructure below. This wasn't containable anymore. This was collapse. Real, total, irreversible collapse. And the only thing he could think about was the armored figure. The one who'd walked past him like he was scenery. The one who'd made him feel small. That thing was still down there, still moving toward whatever it considered the source. Still operating like Homelander's authority meant nothing. He dropped into the sub-level access following the trail of cleared passages and eliminated entities. The deeper he went, the more obvious the pattern became. Systematic, efficient, everything the operator touched turned into empty corridors and solved problems. Homelander found it 3 levels down, standing before a reinforced door that led to the original containment chamber. The door Vought had sealed. The one protecting the fragment they'd decided to keep active. The figure was placing charges on the hinges, preparing to breach.
I told you, this is mine.
The figure paused, turned slightly, assessed Homelander with that same cold evaluation, then returned to placing charges.
Look at me when I'm talking to you.
The figure activated the charges, stepped back. The door blew inward with a concussive blast that shook the entire sub-level. Homelander moved on. Instinct grabbed the figure, threw it away from the entrance with enough force to crater the wall behind. The figure hit, dropped to the ground, stood immediately. No hesitation, no damage assessment. Just renewed approach toward the now open chamber. Homelander blocked the entrance, eyes glowing red, ready to finally end this. The figure stopped 3 meters away. For the first time since they'd met, it seemed to fully focus on him. Not as furniture, as the problem that needed solving before the objective could be reached. Weapons deployed, not the impact tools from before. Everything. The full loadout. Energy systems that made the air taste like ozone and metal. Projectile launchers. Close combat configurations. All of it coming online simultaneously. Homelander smiled. Finally. A real fight. Something that acknowledged his power by bringing everything it had. The figure attacked without warning. No posturing. No threats. Just immediate overwhelming violence. Homelander met it with equal aggression, heat vision, and super strength against armor and weapons that shouldn't exist in this world. They tore through the sub-level. Concrete shattered. Support beams bent. The infrastructure groaned under forces it was never designed to withstand. Homelander fought like he always did, raw power, infinite confidence, expecting victory because he'd never known defeat. The figure fought like something that had killed gods and didn't remember their names. It absorbed Homelander's strikes, turned his momentum against him, exploited every opening with surgical precision. When Homelander flew, it grounded him. When he used heat vision, it positioned itself so the beams hit load-bearing structures instead. When he grabbed it, broke the grip with techniques that suggested thousands of hours of combat experience against opponents stronger and faster than him. This wasn't a battle. This was a tutorial on how to dismantle something that thought it was invincible. Homelander's shoulder dislocated. His ribs cracked. His vision blurred from repeated impacts to his head. Pain he hadn't felt in years. Real, undeniable, impossible pain. He healed fast, but not fast enough. The figure pressed every advantage, never giving time to recover, always maintaining offensive pressure.
Do you know who I am? I'm Homelander. I'm the strongest thing on this planet. You can't...
A gauntlet strike cut him off. Energy discharge at point-blank range. His jaw fractured. Words became impossible. The figure didn't care what he was called. Didn't care about reputation or power or any of the mythology Vought had built around him. To this thing, Homelander was just another obstacle. tougher than most. But still, just something blocking the path that needed to be removed. He tried to fly, make distance, reset. The figure's arm shot out, grabbed his cape, used his own acceleration to redirect him into the ground. He hit hard enough to embed himself in concrete. Before he could rise, the figure was on him, pinning him, preparing a killing strike.
Wait.
The strike came anyway, aimed at his throat. Homelander's durability held, but barely. The armor on the gauntlet began to glow, building charge, preparing to deliver enough force to overcome, even compound 5 enhancements. This was real. This was happening. Homelander was about to die in a basement. No cameras, no witnesses, no one to tell the story of America's protector making his last stand. Just him and a thing that didn't care about stories. His eyes blazed. Full power, desperation. Heat vision at maximum output, point blank everything he had left. The figure's helmet took the brunt visor, cracking system shorting. It released its grip, staggered back, armor smoking. Homelander struggled to his feet. Saw his chance. Saw the figure momentarily compromised. Charged forward with the last of his strength, planning to use raw, physical power to finish what his heat vision had started. The figure's hand moved. Fast. Too fast. A blade appeared. Not energy, not projectile. Physical, ancient-looking, but functional. It caught Homelander mid-charge, redirected his momentum, and in one smooth motion opened his throat. Homelander stopped, stumbled, brought his hand to his neck, felt blood, his blood, pouring between his fingers faster than his healing could manage. The cut was deep, precise, severed something critical. He looked at the figure, tried to speak. No sound came out, just wet choking. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, then forward face hitting concrete. The figure stood over him, watched him bleed. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just confirmation that the obstacle had been neutralized. Homelander's eyes stared at nothing, still glowing, faintly dimming with each second. America's strongest hero died on cold stone alone, unmourned, having accomplished nothing except proving that strength without purpose was just noise. The figure stepped over the body, retrieved its helmet, assessed the damage. Systems compromised, but functional. Objective still achievable. It continued into the chamber. The fragment sat in its containment field, pulsing with that wrong light, tethering something from elsewhere to this reality. Vaught's equipment surrounded it, monitoring, stabilizing, maintaining the connection they decided was profitable. The figure studied the setup for exactly 3 seconds, then systematically destroyed every piece of equipment. Not frantically, not angrily. With the same efficiency it applied to everything else. Each machine eliminated, each connection severed, each stabilization protocol terminated. The fragment began to destabilize. The tether weakened. Whatever had been held open started to close. Entities throughout the city began to withdraw, pulled back toward the source no longer sustained by the maintained connection. The figure planted charges on the fragment itself, the kind designed to annihilate on a molecular level. Set the timer for 60 seconds, turned and walked away with the same unhurried pace it had used for the entire operation. Behind it, the countdown continued. The fragment pulsed faster. The connection collapsed. Reality began to remember how it was supposed to work. The figure climbed back through the sublevels, past Homelander's corpse, past the destroyed equipment, past the evidence of what had happened here. 30 seconds left. 20, 10. The explosion was contained, but absolute. The fragment ceased to exist. The tether severed completely. The breach sealed with the finality of someone closing a door they never planned to open again. The figure emerged at street level. The city continued burning. People continued dying. The crisis wasn't over. It was just no longer metastasizing. The source was gone. The entities would fade, slowly, but inevitably. Behind the cracked visor, there was no sense of victory, no relief. Just recognition that the job was done. The checklist was complete. This world could handle its own problems now. The supernatural element had been removed. What remained was human corruption and human consequences, not the figure's problem, not its jurisdiction. It had come to seal a breach. The breach was sealed. Everything else was noise. It walked through the ruined streets, past panicked civilians, past overwhelmed emergency services, past Vought security teams trying to establish control. None of them stopped it. None of them understood what it was or what it had just done. 4 blocks from the containment site, it stopped. Assessed orientation, calculated the most efficient route to the dimensional anomaly that had brought it here. The same transit method that had pulled it from its reality to this one could be reversed. The equipment was damaged, but serviceable. The return trip would be uncomfortable, imprecise, but functional. Good enough. It resumed walking, left the city behind, left the crisis for the humans to clean up, left Homelander's body to be found by whoever found it first, and struggled to explain how America's invincible protector had bled out in a basement. In Vought Tower, Sister Sage watched the last functional drone feed die. Every camera in the sublevel had been destroyed. The last thermal signature showed Homelander's heat signature fading to ambient. Then nothing. She closed her tablet, stood, walked to the window, watched smoke rise from multiple districts, watched her carefully managed crisis spiral into actual disaster now that the controlled element had been removed. They'd lost. Not to the entities, not to the breach. To a single operator who decided their management was the problem and solved it with the same efficiency it solved everything else. She should have been angry. Should have been scrambling to control the narrative. But all she could think was how perfectly the math had failed. How all her predictions and projections and carefully calculated variables had meant nothing against something that simply didn't participate in the framework. The phone rang. The VP of Operations, probably demanding status updates and damage control strategies. She let it ring. What was there to say? That Homelander was dead. That the crisis was resolving without their input. That Vought had been rendered irrelevant in its own disaster. The truth was simple and unacceptable. They'd tried to weaponize hell, and something older than their ambitions had closed the cage and walked away. The phone stopped ringing. Outside, the city burned, and somewhere in the distance, an armored figure crossed the perimeter, heading outbound, job complete, already forgetting this world the same way it had forgotten all the others. Just another breach sealed. Just another source eliminated. Just another Tuesday. Morning came the way it always did after disasters. Sunlight on rubble, smoke thinning into haze, emergency sirens distant enough to ignore. The city hadn't ended. It had just changed states. From functional to surviving. From managed to endured. The entities were gone. Not all at once. They faded over 18 hours, pulled back toward a source that no longer existed, unraveling like dreams when the dreamer wakes. By dawn, nothing remained except stains on concrete and memories that would take years to process. Cleanup crews moved through the restricted sectors wearing hazmat suits that wouldn't protect them from anything that mattered. They collected what could be collected, documented what needed documenting, avoided asking questions about the things they found that didn't match any biology textbook. The official death toll would settle at 4,312. The real number was higher, but counting required bodies, and some people had simply stopped existing in ways that left nothing to count. Families reported them missing. The city marked them as displaced. Everyone understood the difference, but nobody wrote it down. Vaught's first official statement went live at 800. Not an apology, a reframing. Ashley delivered it from a prepared script standing in front of a backdrop that showed reconstruction crews and resilient citizens. Her voice steady, her hands just barely shaking.
Vought International faced an unprecedented crisis, an incursion from forces beyond our understanding. We adapted, we protected, we endured. This tragedy revealed gaps in our protocols, and we accept responsibility for improving our response infrastructure.
She didn't mention Homelander. Didn't reference the Seven. Didn't acknowledge that their symbol of invincibility had died in a basement without witnesses. The company line was simple external threat. Internal strength, forward progress. The subtext was clearer. We're still here, we're still necessary, and questioning us is dangerous because next time might be worse. By noon, 3 senators had already drafted emergency legislation expanding Vaught's authority in crisis zones. The bills would pass. They always did. Fear was excellent at generating compliance, and the fear was genuine now. People had seen what lived in the spaces between normal, and they wanted someone to promise it wouldn't come back. That Vought had maintained the breach didn't matter. That they'd chosen profit over closure didn't matter. They were the only institution that looked organized while everything else collapsed. Organization felt like safety. People chose safety over truth, every time. Sister Sage watched the polling data from her office. Vaught's approval rating had dropped 12 points in the immediate aftermath, but was already climbing back. Give it a week, and they'd be higher than before. Crisis was excellent for brand loyalty, as long as you survived it. She'd already begun the next phase. New soup recruitment, rebranded messaging. A shift from heroes protect you to strength maintains order. Less aspirational, more utilitarian. Better suited to a population that had learned God wasn't coming to save them. Homelander's absence would be explained as tactical redeployment, then gradual retirement, then memory. The company would phase him out the way corporations always eliminated inconvenient assets, quietly, systematically, without acknowledging what actually happened. She pulled up the classified file on his death. The fragments they'd recovered. The analysis of wounds suggesting weapons technology decades beyond current civilian access. The implications that something had entered their reality, solved their crisis, and left without demanding payment or recognition. That disturbed her more than the entities had. At least entities could be understood through patterns. The armored operator had been completely unpredictable, because it didn't care about anything except its objective. You couldn't manipulate something that didn't want anything from you. She archived the file, marked it, learn and move on. The world was full of variables. You couldn't control them all. You just built systems resilient enough to survive when they appeared. The boys sat in a safe house 4 miles from the restricted perimeter. They'd survived. That counted for something, though none of them could articulate what. Huey stared at his laptop, scrolling through footage that civilians had uploaded before Vaught's scrubbers caught it. Blurry shapes, burning buildings. Nothing that captured the scope.
They're already spinning it. Triumph of human resilience. Not a word about what actually happened.
Butcher didn't look up from cleaning a weapon he'd probably never use.
Course they are. Crisis is just PR in a different font.
MM worked on inventory. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. The practical concerns of people who couldn't afford to stop moving just because one threat had passed. There would be others. There always were.
What do we do now? Same thing we always do. Document, expose, hope someone gives a shit this time.
But his tone suggested he didn't believe that any more than Huey did. They'd watched Vought weaponize hell itself and come out stronger. What was documentation against that? Frenchie spoke from the corner where he'd been silent for hours.
The armored one. It did not care about politics or justice or any framework we understand. It simply removed the problem and left. Perhaps that is the only solution that works, not reform, removal. Yeah, and who decides what gets removed? You trust that judgment. I trust nothing, but I observed efficiency. We fight the system. It ignored the system. One of these approaches actually solved the crisis.
The conversation died there. Because Frenchie was right, and that truth was uncomfortable. They'd been fighting Vought for years with evidence and exposure and moral arguments. An external force had solved more in 72 hours than they'd managed in a decade, but they couldn't become that. Couldn't operate outside every framework and expect anything except more violence. So they'd keep doing what they did, documenting horrors and hoping exposure mattered, even when it clearly didn't. The TV in the corner showed Vought's press conference. Ashley answering softball questions from reporters who'd been carefully selected. Everything controlled. Everything managed. The machine running smoothly now that the disruption had been eliminated.
She's not even mentioning Homelander. Dead Soupy's bad press. Better to pretend he never mattered.
Huey closed his laptop, looked at his team, exhausted, traumatized, still here.
So we just keep going, even though nothing changed. Things changed. The threat changed. We adapted. That's survival. That's not enough. It's what we've got.
6 miles west, in a sector still marked restricted, a dimensional anomaly flickered and collapsed. The residual energy that had sustained it finally dissipated. Nothing came through. Nothing left. Just a disturbance in local space-time that would puzzle physicists for years, but ultimately be filed under unexplained phenomena and forgotten. The armored figure was already gone, returned to wherever it had originated from, through means that left no trace except confused sensor readings and a handful of blurry photographs that would become internet folklore. People would argue about what it was. Military experiment, alien intervention, hoax. Nobody would believe the simple truth. Something had crossed between realities to seal a breach, found obstacles, removed them, and departed. No agenda beyond function. No interest in the aftermath. Just a job completed and a return to whatever campaigns it fought in spaces this world didn't have names for. The city rebuilt slowly. Infrastructure came back in patches. Power grids stabilized. The safe zones transitioned to temporary housing. Then permanent displacement camps as people realized their original homes no longer existed in any functional sense. Vought helped, provided resources, positioned soups for photo opportunities with refugees, built its new narrative, one carefully managed image at a time. The company that endured. The company that protected. Never mind what they'd done to necessitate that protection. 3 weeks later, a new billboard appeared downtown. Not Homelander's face. A new image. Abstract. Strong. Vought resilient tomorrow. The old mythology replaced with utilitarian promise. People looked at it and felt nothing. Which was the point. Feeling led to questions. Numbness led to compliance. The boys continued their work. Smaller operations, targeted exposures, chipping away at a structure too massive to topple. Butcher knew they'd never win. But they'd never been fighting to win. Just fighting to make sure someone remembered what losing looked like. The world moved on. Trauma became background radiation. Horror became the new normal. Systems adapted and populations survived, and institutional power consolidated exactly the way it always did after crisis. Hell had come. Hell had been driven back. And the monsters who'd kept it open for profit remained exactly where they'd always been. Running the machine, writing the narrative, deciding which truths mattered and which ones disappeared. In a basement somewhere, crews found Homelander's body, photographed it, documented the wounds, loaded it into a truck, and drove it to a facility that didn't appear on any map. The autopsy would be classified. The findings would be buried. America's strongest hero would be disappeared by the same company that created him. Nobody mourned. He'd never been a person, just a product. And products could be replaced. The sun set on a city that looked almost normal from a distance. Lights in buildings, traffic on streets. The rhythm of survival resuming. But the shadows were deeper now. The silences lasted longer. People walked faster after dark and locked their doors with new urgency. They'd learned something fundamental about their world. That protection was conditional. That heroes were marketing. That the things they feared in the dark were nothing compared to the things that walked in daylight, wearing suits and smiles. Hell was gone, the system remained. And in the end, that was always the more dangerous threat.
Hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss out future videos. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time in this channel.